to the first official week of Coding from Null. Today we're going to start on our first project, this really cool, completely customizable coming soon page. This is a really cool idea if you're building your own website and you want some sort of web presence there, but also if you're a freelancer, this is a really great ad for your clients to give them some call to action to their customers while they wait for their website to be built. Well, before we start going into this, there's a few sort of things that we need first. We need to cover some tools and stuff that we're gonna need. One of those being create React app that we're gonna use to bootstrap the project. So we're gonna be covering an introduction to that today, as well as some CSS grid fundamentals to give us sort of the layout of our web page. And then pretty much that's going to be it. But before we start that, what I really want to go into is dig into exactly what we're going to be building. So let's go ahead and take a more in-depth look at that.
All right, so let's start digging into exactly what we're going to be building here. So I have our little coming soon page up here, and you can check out a live demo of this at codingfromnull.io at the time of this video anyway. If the course platform is actually up and running by the time you're seeing this video, there will always be a link to the source code on GitHub in the description below. So there's a few things going on here. One of the first things I want to show you is just how responsive this page is. So we come over here and we start dragging this down. We see as we start to scale the size down, things start to move around, and that makes sure that this design will look good at any screen resolution. Now, we are going to be using a really cool technique called CSS grid to make this responsive design throughout this tutorial series. The next thing here is this cool countdown timer. It's a React component that we're passing a date into sometime in the future, and it's giving us this cool little countdown. This is actually going to be the focus of next week's video. If we look down here, we're using some cool CSS animation here, and we're actually going to be creating all these icons as well, including these social media icons here. Obviously just some simple text. We got some little CSS gradient things that we're going to be doing here. And then finally, this little guy here is just a form that anyone visiting our website can submit their email address and sign up to our mailing list. And so let's go ahead and just type in a email here and click submit, and we'll see it'll grind for a little bit and then give us this cool little message saying, hey, welcome to our email list. Now let's go ahead and try to sign up again with that same email, and it'll see, hey, you've already joined our mailing list. So we've got those two. Now if anything else goes wrong, we have a fallback here. So this is just a nefarious looking email address that I'll submit here, and it's just going to give me this kind of generic error that something went wrong. And that's pretty much it with the app itself. There's obviously a lot more going on under the hood that we're going to learn throughout this, but as far as features and functionality, that's pretty much it. And then obviously these will go out to your, your Twitter. This is my YouTube and stuff. So now that we've got that covered, let's start digging into the tools and all the software and stuff that we're going to need to build this sucker. So if we go here to nodejs.org, you want to make sure that you have Node installed. Now, if you're not sure whether you have Node installed or not, you can go into your terminal and find out by just typing in node-v, and it will give you the version number that you're running. You can see mine's back a little ways. I should probably bump that up. We also need npm, which should just come right with Node. You can go ahead and just make sure that you have that as well. That's just the Node packet manager that we're going to need to manage the packets of our application. And of course, I would want to make sure that you download this one. This recommended for most users. Don't worry about this latest features one. And so that's pretty much it there for the node part. Next, we're going to need a text editor. Here I'm using Visual Studio Code. Highly recommend it. If you're more comfortable with like Sublime or Atom or something like that, feel free to use that. But again, I would strongly recommend using Visual Studio Code. You can download that here and just make sure it's for your specific operating system. The next thing that we're going to need is Firefox's Developer Edition. The reason we're going to be using this is because it comes with some really cool developer tools that we can use for our CSS grid layout. You can see them here. So make sure you have that installed. We'll actually be using this later on in this tutorial. And the next thing that you want is the React Developer Tools for Chrome extension. This will just give us the tools that we need to kind of dive down into our React components and stuff as we get further along in this tutorial series. So that's pretty much it for that as far as tools and everything that we're going to be using. The next thing that I want to show you is how we're going to get this application up and running from the start. And we are going to be using a tool called Create React App. Now, it's nothing we really need to download or anything, but rather that we're just going to use. So let's go ahead and start that. So here you want to get into the directory that you want to be in before you start. So I'm going to go back a ways, and here we go. Okay, so this is where I want to be for mine. Now what I'm going to run is mpx, and then create React app, and then whatever I want to name the application. I'm going to be naming this coming soon. You could name it whatever you want. Go ahead and press enter. Now this is going to grind for a little while. So after this is done, go ahead and come back and we will pick up where we left off. All right, so once that's all finished, we're going to be left with a completely all set up and ready to go React application that we can customize to our liking, and that is what we are going to do. So let's go ahead and just see what it looks like when we run this sucker from the beginning. So go ahead and CD into whatever the name is of the application that you chose. So I'm going to go into coming soon and then type npm start. Now this is going to start our application on port 3000. So you'll see something in here saying your application is ready on localhost 3000, and usually we'll just start it directly for you in Chrome here. So you'll see what we get. This may take a minute to load for me. I'm running a lot of stuff on my computer at the moment, so it might be a little laggy. And there we go. There's our React application. Not a whole lot that comes with it, but just kind of the bare basics to get us up and running. And this is what it looks like for now. So let's go ahead and go back into our editor, and let's go into File and Open Folder, and let's hunt down our project and go ahead and just open the folder, and you'll see it comes with all this stuff that was built into the React application when we ran Create React App. So what exactly did we get here? So if we go ahead and we open the public folder, you're going to see this index.html file. Let's go ahead and open that up, and you'll see it just looks like your typical HTML file. Not a whole lot of crazy stuff going on here. The one thing that I want to make sure that you know about in this file is this div here, this div of ID of root. We'll be coming back to that in just a second. This is basically how our application targets this HTML to load all our React components. And pretty much everything else in this public folder is just some icons and stuff. Manifest.json, this is really if we were building like a PWA or something, so we won't really be worrying about that. Robots.txt, if you know anything about these, this is just how search engines and stuff know how to index your website. We'll dig into this a little bit more in a later video when we start going through the SEO stuff. And that's pretty much it for that public folder. Now in the source folder, you'll see that it comes with some CSS files, this index.js, this app.js. So what the heck is all this stuff? This is just an SVG logo. We'll end up deleting this when we import our own logo. And then this service worker.js, this again is mainly for PWA stuff, so we won't be worrying about this too much at all. And then some testing stuff. So first off, let's go ahead and we'll just get rid of this app.test.js. We're not going to be covering any testing or anything in this tutorial, so we'll go ahead and just throw that out. But let's go ahead and look at this index.js and see what's going on here. So we've got some import statements. We're importing React, React DOM. This is all the stuff that we get with Create React App. It does React, React DOM, React scripts, all this stuff to get us up and ready. Now, it takes care of a lot of stuff that we don't have to, which is really nice. Importing some CSS here from our index.css, and then it's importing app from ./app, and that is this app here, or in React world is the app component, which we will dig into a little more in a second here. Now what's key here is we're using this React DOM to render out this app component to document.getElementById root. Now this should look familiar because this is that div that we saw in the index.html file. So this is where the React DOM knows to put our app component, which is for this application, it's going to be our highest order component. And we're actually going to be renaming this here shortly. But that's where our application gets built into, is in the root element of that index.html file. And then this service worker stuff, again, PWA stuff, which we won't be covering in this tutorial. So let's go ahead and look at that app.js component. If we look here, there's not a lot going on here either. Importing React, that logo, some CSS. If you're not real familiar with React, I'll have a couple of kind of beginner resources in the description. But really here, this is just a JavaScript function that's returning stuff that we call JSX. And this JSX, it looks a lot like HTML, and it's meant to, because at the end of the day, it's going to actually render out HTML. It's going to render out a div, a header, image tag. You'll see some weird naming stuff sometimes with class name instead of just class, as you would see in just regular HTML. This is because this is actually JavaScript at the end of the day, and class is actually a reserved word in JavaScript. There's a JavaScript class, so you can't really use that. So you'll see some weird naming stuff, but really it looks a lot like HTML, and that's because when it renders out, it's going to render out as just HTML. And so this is our app component that you see the image, this app logo. That's what we saw when we looked at the application running. And that's pretty much the real basics of what comes with Create React App. There's a lot of stuff that it's doing under the hood for us as well. There's some Webpack config that it's doing for us that we don't have to worry about. It's doing all the Babel settings, which converts our ES6 into ES5 compatible JavaScript. So there's a lot of stuff that Create React App does for us that we don't have to worry about, which is really nice because it gets us up and running really fast. So that's kind of it for what's in the public and source folders. If you're familiar with Node, you've done any other applications with like JavaScript or anything like that, you should kind of be familiar with package.json and things like that. This is our scripts, so stuff that we can run in the terminal and what it will do for us, and then sets up our dependencies. So whenever we npm install anything for our application, will show up here under our dependencies, and we'll be installing quite a bit of stuff for this application to get it up and running. And that's pretty much it for the entirety of Create React App, or is what we're going to cover, at least in this tutorial. There's obviously a lot more going on here as well. So let's go ahead and actually start pulling this thing apart and customizing it to make it look a little bit more like what we have at the codingfromnull.io website. So the first thing that I want to do here is actually set up a little bit more of a better file structure than we currently have. In here, they're just throwing everything into source, but once we start adding a lot more components, it's going to start getting a little bit more complex and confusing. So let's go ahead and add a few new folders here. One is going to be just called components, and then we'll add another folder, and we will just call this one styles, and then we'll also add another one to house all our images. And so let's start just kind of moving some stuff around. We'll have to change some of our import statements and stuff, but let's go ahead and we'll take this app.js, we'll throw this into a components folder because this is a component. App.css, this is a style, so let's go ahead and throw it into the styles folder. Same with index.css. Oops, I'm moving those into the image folder for some reason. Let's go ahead and move that into the styles folder. Yes, move it. And that's we'll go ahead and move the logo into, actually, let's just go ahead and just delete this. We're not going to be using this anyway. As we start to move along, we'll just upload, our own images into the image folder. So let's go ahead and clear up our import statements first of all. And actually, you know what? Let's start renaming stuff too, because we don't want this to be called app. We actually want this to be called, our highest order component in this application to be called coming soon. It's our coming soon application. So let's go ahead and just rename this to coming soon. You always want, if you're not really super 100% familiar with React, you definitely want to make sure that your naming convention for your components always starts with a capital. That's how it knows when, like if we look at index.js, see how this looks like a HTML tag, but it's uppercase here. That's how it knows that it's a React component. So you're going to make sure that any of our React components is uppercase. And let's go ahead and rename this one. We'll just also rename this to coming soon as well. And so let's just start fixing those import statements. So we don't have this logo. Go ahead and delete that. Import app.css. We actually have to go up a level in our directory because this is in styles and this is actually called coming soon. Okay. And let's see, in our index.js, we need to get rid of this And this is going to be coming soon from /components / coming soon, and change this to coming soon. And I think that's pretty much it. Oh, we need to change this one too. So this is going to be, let's see, / and then just styles and / index.css. I think that's pretty much it. And if we go into coming soon, oh, it's yelling at us because this logo. That's okay. So we're just going to go ahead and delete all this anyway. Delete. And so it doesn't yell at us some more later, let's go ahead and just put a H1 in here, and we'll just say coming soon. Soom. Hope if you know how to spell right. And let's go ahead and just change this class name to background. This is going to be some styling that we'll do here real shortly. And so that's pretty much it. I think we covered all the changes of the import statements that we need, and our changes to our component here. Actually, this should be called, before I get ahead of myself here, this should also be called coming soon, right? Okay. And yeah, I don't think I'm missing anything. I'm sure I am, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. So that's pretty much it for that part. So now let's start looking at all the CSS that we're going to be doing. So the first CSS file that I want to start messing with is the index.css file. So let's go ahead and look at that. So what I first want to do is start setting up some CSS variables that we're going to be using throughout the application. Now it's just going to set us up kind of like just some variables of colors that we're going to be using through the application, so it all looks really nice. I usually just put my CSS variables on the root, and that way they're just accessible throughout the entire application. So we're going to be naming one of them green, and it's going to be a specific green that we're going to be using. It's messing this up in our -- green. Oops. And it is for CEDC4. And then we're going to be using a dark gray that is hash, and it is 292F36. And then we've also got a white that we're going to be using. It's just a little off-white, and this is FFFFFA. And then we've got a black that we're going to be using, which is 4. Okay, and then we've got a orange that we're going to use for that notification if you've already signed up for the email. And it's hash FA8334. And then last is the color for the error notification, and that is hash FF312E. Okay, so these are all the colors that we're going to be using throughout the entire application, and we just call these by saying var in any of our CSS and then passing through the variable name, which is the -- green. Really cool. I love using CSS variables, so highly recommend taking use of this in any other application that you're using. It's super useful. Let's go ahead and change this. Instead of on the body, we're going to put this on the HTML margin. Let's go ahead and we'll get rid of that. We're going to just keep the same font family, keep it simple. We are going to add some text shadow here. So some text shadow, and this is going to be 0, and then 2 pixels and 0, and RGBA, and it's going to be 0, 0, 0. So it's going to be black, but we're going to set the opacity to 07. So that will just make sure the opacity, it's, you know, going to be very see-through basically at 0.07, but it's going to be fairly dark, so it's whatever background it's on, it's just going to be slightly darker than whatever the background is that it's on. And then let's go ahead and do text align, and this is going to be center. So all of our text throughout our entire application is going to be center. We're not going to be writing any code snippets, so we can actually just delete that one altogether. Let's go ahead and put that body tag in, and then we're going to do a background color, and we're going to use one of our CSS variables here, and it's going to be that dark gray. Let's go ahead and set the min height, and then we are going to calc this at 100 VH, which is the viewport height. If you haven't used viewport units, I highly recommend it. It's very useful for any responsive design that you're trying to use, because it's going to measure the viewport window, the width of the actual browser window, so the height. This is VH, this is going to measure whatever the height is. So the body, we want it not to go all the way over. We're going to just have this minus 100 pixels, okay? And then we're going to set a margin on the body as well. This is so that when we start going down to mobile, you notice that nothing bumped up against the sides of the browser window, and that's because we have a little bit of margin there on the body that's keeping everything from bumping up against that. Another thing that we actually want to put this up here on the HTML, I forgot here, is the border box, which is box sizing, and that's border box. And then just to make extra sure, we're going to put it on every element and also every before and every after. And I will explain why we are doing this in just a second here. And box sizing, border box. So what really kind of messes things up with the sizing thing in CSS is it doesn't take into account padding and the border when you're doing, like, if you were to say width 100 pixels, it doesn't take into account the padding and stuff by default, which can lead to some really kooky CSS stuff to figure out. I always use box sizing border box. In fact, I actually wish this was the default, but if you really want to make sure it's on everything, just put it on the highest one here at HTML, border box, and then on everything's before and everything's after is going to be that border box, and that will really make your life in CSS much easier. So now that we have our index.css pretty well ironed out, there's going to be some little changes here coming up. Let's go ahead and go into the coming soon CSS file. And what we're going to do here is we're just going to go ahead and just delete everything in here. And what we want to do is actually we want to set a little bit of styles on that background div element that we set. And the reason I'm doing this is because I want to have a grid layout that's the highest for the entire application, and I want to set that on the background. And so we will say display grid. This is going to give us a grid, and then grid gap is going to be the gap in between each grid item, and I will show you that in just a second. We are going to want some columns, and we are actually just going to have this at 1 FR. Now, FR is a fractional unit. It's CSS grid specific. Basically, it's going to say, hey, whatever the width is that I have available to me, this element, I will take up this fractional unit of that. So 1 FR, I'll take up the whole thing for this one column, right? If I wanted 2 columns that were both equal, I would just say 1 FR, 1 FR. I would have 2, and they would be equal to each other. You can have some, if you want like 3 FR to 1 FR, it'll be fractional to that. So one will be 3 times bigger than the other. That's pretty much it. We will go into more on that in later tutorial series. So let's go grid template rows. We're going to make some rows. So remember, we had 6 things there. We had, what was it? We had our countdown, we had a logo, we had a title, we had a description, we had our subscribe form, and then we had our social media stuff at the bottom. Now I'm going to just do 100 pixels for the first row, auto, so it's just going to be the size of the logo in that instance. And remember, the logo kind of shrinks as the browser window shrinks, so that's why we want to set that one to auto. This is 50 pixels. We're going to make this one auto, this one 100 pixels, and the last one auto. Now, what's really cool about CSS Grid is we can name these areas. I'm going to do that here, like saying grid template areas. And the first one is going to be called countdown, because that's going to be our countdown, right? Second one is going to be logo. It's where our logo is going to be, or in this case, just our little spinning gear that we have. Next one is the title. Then we're going to do a description. And then our subscribe. And then last is our social. Semicolon. Don't forget that. I always forget that. And then we want to justify items and center everything. And then also align items and center everything. And this is going to make sure that both horizontally and vertically, all of the stuff inside the grid is going to be aligned center. And then we want to set the color. So this is going to give us basically the font color of the website. And we are just going to use that CSS variable, white. So it's going to give us that nice little off-white. And that is it for the background CSS and setting up the grid for us right there. So the next thing that we want to do is set that background image. So let me show you one of my resources that I use for background images is this really cool site called Hero Patterns. What's really cool about this is these are all SVGs, so they're all infinitely repeatable. So if you set these as your background image, it'll infinitely repeat and fill the browser window. Well, we're going to be setting it on the body. And it's just going to fill that up repeatedly with this little floating cogs guy. So let's go ahead and just download the unstyled SVG. Go ahead, get out of this. Go into here. I'm just going to copy this sucker and then go into my project directory, into source, and then into the images folder that we set up, and I'm just going to paste it directly into there. Go ahead and close out of that, go back into our text editor, see our floating cogs SVG has showed up right there, and if we go into our index.css, right here on the, just double check here, yep, on the body, we are going to set the background image to that SVG, we use URL, and then we're going to say // images floating cogs SVG. And that's going to give us that infinitely repeatable cogs that you saw in that first demonstration when I was showing you everything. So now we should be able to, fingers crossed, if we save this, we should be able to see all of our changes if we didn't miss anything, or if I didn't miss anything, because create React app hot reloads. So something is going on here. Oh yeah, I didn't restart it. That's what happened. So we go npm start. It's going to grind again. And there you go. We have our h1 tag here. You can see a little bit if you look real closely. It's got that text shadow there. We have our nice little background, so we've definitely made some progress. We're moving quite along. The last thing that I want to show you is, let's go ahead and just copy this. You don't really have to copy it, but and then go ahead and open that Firefox Developers Edition that I had you download earlier. And then go ahead and just paste that directly in. I'll bring up mine here so you can see it. And make this a little bit bigger. If you hit Control-Shift-I, it'll bring up the developer tools for Firefox. And you'll see over here, it's got this thing for Flexbox. We won't really be using Flexbox at all. But then it has this thing for grid. And it goes, okay, anything that's display grid, I'm going to have an item here. So at the end of this, you're going to have a bunch of grid items here. Here, we only have one because we only set display grid on the background. And if you click this, it's going to actually show us the grid, this nice little purple hue on it, and we can see our whole grid layout, which is going to be super helpful as we start to move along. And you can see that 10 pixel margin, right? So nothing bumps up against the border of the browser window when we start resizing stuff. You can see here, remember I set auto on 3 of these. That's why you see here, this is auto, and then there's actually one last row here that's auto, but there's nothing in there. So it's 0, but there's technically 6 rows here. And then this one is however many pixels we set it, and so on and so forth. And so that's kind of it. We're going to be using this a lot. It's a really cool tool, really easy to mess with CSS grid with this with these developer tools in Firefox. They're awesome. And so that's pretty much it for this week. I think we covered a lot. We're moving along at a pretty steady pace. Next week we'll take out this little coming soon stuff here, and we'll build another whole component for that little countdown timer that we have. Super excited to show you that one. I thought it was really cool. So yeah, come back again next week to see that, and make sure that you hit that subscribe button to get all the latest updates on all the videos that I'm going to be putting out.